Well, we're still working on the Chama cooling tower.
Boy, what a project.
Started on it 4 years ago.
Wow.
And it got sort of sidetracked for a while, but we're back on it. It's still just a monster project. We're putting days and days and days and days and days in it. Anyway, this is part 2. Last week we got it through to this stage here. Got the stain and the paint on it. The metal roof was put on 4 years ago, and there's a lot more of this that needs to go on. But this is a really fun technique that I've used for building corrugated metal roofs. So now we are undertaking one of the more difficult parts, I think, and that's the buckets and the pulley system that goes up the back of the tower.
Right.
One of the more interesting parts of the back of the tower are the coal grates here.
Oh, you could lose a foot in there.
We did not wander out onto the grates. I have wandered out years and years and years ago. But while we were there, wasn't this interesting?
That is really interesting.
If not a bit scary.
Just about, yeah.
At any rate, the construction of the grates years ago, it was mostly constructed out of evergreen styrene. And the spacing here had to be adjusted because there's just not that much room.
Oh, I know. And then how you did that is really neat.
Yeah, I actually constructed a jig for cutting out all of those over 100 little ribs that go across there, so that they're all the exact same size. And then I fished brass wire through it to make the whole thing strong.
Right.
I've opted to not model the below ground stuff just because there's cross beams and wiring and all kinds of stuff below the layout right here. And cutting into that just didn't seem to be something that I wanted to do.
Right.
But wasn't this interesting, all the mechanism and everything that exists down here below ground on the prototype?
It kind of reminded me when I was a kid and we go exploring these places and told to get out.
Yeah, it's sort of like going back to those same experiences that we had as a kid, only this time with permission.
Yes, it's still just as thrilling, too.
Anyway, while we were there, we not only got a demonstration by the friends of the Cumbers and Toltec, but Pat Moffris, who's one of the friends of the Cumbers and Toltec, really gave us the chef's tour of the kitchen.
Right.
We got to see everything up close and personal and get inside the mechanism and really document for ourselves how this thing works. But this was really key, getting to see the buckets go up and down. Because this week, this is exactly what we're building. We've already built the buckets, but now the whole track and pulley mechanism that operates this thing. 4 years ago, I set about modeling the buckets, and unfortunately, I didn't have these really good pictures, and I didn't fully understand their operation at the time. But working with the photographs that I had, I constructed these 2 buckets. There's a couple of small problems. Well, I shouldn't say smaller. One of them is a rather large problem. But one of the smaller problems, I made the axles here just a little too wide. And so when I put the cars in here, I hadn't taken into account the thickness of the brass. And when I put this in here, the ends of the pulleys are pressing up against the brass and they don't want to slide easily. And I want them to be able to slide rather easily. My original goal was to have this 100% functional, not operational. I don't want it to actually go up and down on some motor or something. But so that it is completely functional. You could move the cars up and down and the pulley system would move and the cars would get to the top and dump and so on. But here's where I made the big mistake, and that's that I have the buckets mounted to the frame of the whole thing, and I have the frame tilting completely over when it gets to the top and goes through the curved track. My assumption was that the lower pulleys ran on the outer track and the upper wheels ran on the inner track, and that would cause the whole thing to tilt over at the top. Even when you're standing right next to it, it's not completely obvious how this works. But there's a third wheel mounted right here, and that's what runs on the inner track. The upper and lower wheels run on the outer track. And when it gets to the curved section at the top, that will cause only the bucket to tilt over, not the entire framework. I found this model online, and it has a completely functional bucket system. And you can see that it has the upper curved tracks here that center wheel is going to ride on. And you can see that the frame is separate from the buckets, and the frame rides straight up and down on the outer track, and the curved inner track causes the bucket to tilt over. Of course, the way I modeled it, with the frames attached directly to the buckets, then the entire frame tilts over. And as I built these things, and the frame is completely welded to the buckets this way, there would be no way of separating that. I would have to I'd just have to start all over. I couldn't even use these guys. So I'm just going to accept the small problem here as a small problem and move on. The buckets will be easy to slide up and down the track, and my plan is to just park them in about this location, as, like I say, it's not going to be operational. I was hoping that it would be 100% functional, but it'll be mostly functional. So I'm just going to stick with my original thought, and that's that the upper wheels will ride on the inner track and the lower wheels will ride on the outer track. So let's get on to building the track. Here on the prototype, we can see that the track actually consists of 3 pieces of angle iron, not channel, but angle iron. The outer channel consists of 2 pieces of angle iron that face each other and almost touch in the middle, which is why I thought it was a channel. And then the inner track is another piece of angle iron, but with the flat section facing away from the channel, creating a completely open channel with just the exposed wood in there. The entire assembly is held together with straps that are bolted to the 3 pieces of channel, and they're quite far apart from each other. The spacing between them is about 6 feet, something like that. So the kit that I got from Dave included 4 lengths of channel, a 3-foot long channel, so those get cut down slightly, and those will form the outer track. And on Dave's version, there is no inner track. The whole bucket just simply rides on the outer track. So I'm going to go ahead and model the inner track by doing the same exact thing of using a piece of angle brass and then soldering that to the cross straps, just like on the prototype. All of this is being constructed out of K&S brass, except for the channels that came from Dave. I love working with brass. I just like silver soldering brass together. It's really strong, and I don't have to worry when I'm sliding the buckets up and down here that something's going to break. And it's just fun. I love working with brass. So I put my parts in place here on the coaling tower to figure out exactly what the spacing needs to be. I actually used my micrometer because it's just easy to get down inside there. And then I took the whole thing over to the bench, and I'm using this soldering block. I'm not sure what it's made out of, but it's an insulated block, and I can clamp everything in place and then come in with my soldering iron with the temperature turned all the way up because I'm working with silver solder, and then just solder this joint right here. And so here's the finished joint. My inner channel slipped ever so slightly, but it's not going to hurt anything. But there's the first strap in place. I'm going to jump forward 1 foot up the track now because the joint up here is a seam between the inner angle iron and the outer channel. Because the angle irons are only a foot long where the channel was 3 feet long, it means that there's going to be 2 seams in the track on the angle. So I started by soldering the channel to the angle on the strap without the seam, and then I came back and added in the next section of angle brass. That was much simpler than trying to do the whole thing in one go. I then came in and added in the intermediate pieces to hold the whole thing in engage, if you will, and finished the whole thing up to 2 feet long to the top of the second angle brass. Now, before building the other 3 tracks, I wanted to go ahead and build the curved sections at the top, because I wasn't quite sure what the fit was going to be, and if I had to change the design on the straight section here, I didn't want to have to do that on 3 individual tracks, so I'm going to start with just one. I had originally hoped to build the curved sections at the top also out of brass, and there's no way to bend the channel or even the angle around in such a sharp curve. I took this heavier piece of brass, and using my Yagas Creek rail bender and also just putting it in a vise and pulling it around, I was able to get a reasonable curve out of it here. But this brass is just too heavy to use for the track. I need a much thinner brass for that, and there's no way to bend that this same way. So I decided to use this piece that I constructed here, which fits perfectly, as a cutting guide, and then build the upper sections out of plastic instead. That means that the curved sections up here aren't going to be terribly strong, and I wouldn't want to try dragging the bucket through here, but I'm not planning to try to run it through the curved section anyway because of my design error in the buckets. In the For What It's Worth department, the Friends of the Cumbers and Toltec don't run their coal buckets up through the curved sections either, for the same exact reason, sort of. There's no design problem with theirs like there is with mine. But they said when they try to run it through the curved sections, the whole thing binds up and wants to come off the track, and they have to go up there and physically dislodge it. So here's how I constructed the curved section of track. Using the brass piece that I knew fit, I used that as a cutting guide and cut it out of evergreen plastic, fairly thin evergreen plastic. I simply freelanced this out with a sharp knife, and I made 4 of them, overlaying the 4 on top of each other to make sure that they were exactly the same. And then I verified that these were going to work before proceeding by just holding it up in place on the coaling tower above the one brass track that I'd already constructed. Next, I added the curved sections. This is just a thin strip evergreen plastic. And I used this little construction jig that we got from Micromart. It's really handy. You can hold things in place with these neodymium magnets, and it holds things nice and rigidly in place while you apply glue. The sides are perfectly square, as are the corners, so it ensures that everything comes in nice and square, and that the metal is coated with some kind of a non-stick surface, so if you inadvertently glue your piece to the jig, it's pretty easy to just pop it loose. And in this case, that happened a lot because I was using the thin Chama solvent glue. I was also able to build all 4 at the same time because the jig has 4 corners. So while one was setting up, I just moved on to the next one so that the solvent glue had time to get nice and strong before popping them loose from the jig. I popped them off of the jig before proceeding to the inner curve just to make sure they weren't going to be glued in place, which of course they were, but just slightly, and then clamped everything back in place with the new inner strip in place, and then put the thin solvent glue around that joint on the inside of the track. So here's how I constructed the curved section of track. Using the brass piece that I knew fit, I used that as a cutting guide and cut it out of evergreen plastic, fairly thin evergreen plastic. And it seems that they're going to work just fine. There's also the ladders that will need to go in here. Can you imagine climbing up here?
Not even in my wildest dreams.
It's all, there's no railings or anything.
No.
There was no OSHA back then.
No.
But that's all stuff that's going to lay on top of these tracks are some walkways and ladders and that sort of thing. So that's going to be really fun to build. But that's not this week. This week I'm just sort of concentrating on getting these tracks in. The buckets fit neatly onto the track. I can put them in place. The problem being that they're way too tight and they don't move because I again, when I built the buckets, I failed to take into account the thickness of the brass track. So I'm just going to pull the little wheels off and cut the axles down slightly. And then the overhead beam is also hitting the track, so I'm going to have to cut that down, or in this case sand it down. I'm going to use the belt sander and just lightly take the edges off of it. Last Tuesday we looked at the construction of the ash pit.
I like the way that turned out. That's so cool.
Yeah, and now that it's finished, well, sort of finished, because next Tuesday we're moving on to the tool rack.
Right.
That goes with the ash pit. So near the ash pit there's a rack full of tools that they use for knocking the clinkers and cinders and ashes out of the firebox. And hopefully you'll want to follow along with that, as well as the rest of the construction on the coaling tower here.
Right.
So if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please just click on the upcoming subscribe button. And by all means, feel free to click on the like button.
Oh, yeah.
And if you feel so inclined, you might also hit the join button and send a few dollars our way. But at least hit the upcoming subscribe button. Zoink! Right there, the subscribe button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we will see you here on Tuesday.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.